Hi, I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer,
And I am Amy Nickerson, the Queen Bee.
and we're trying an experiment here. Just wanted to talk about some of the things that we experience as beekeepers, particularly as beginner beekeepers, and the sort of questions that we get from other beginners, as Amy being president of Penobscot County Beekeepers and myself as giving lots of classes and that sort of thing. We get a lot of people inquiring about problems they have with beekeeping and the fears and the trials that they go through as newbies, and so I thought we'd give it a chat.
Absolutely. And Peter was my mentor. I learned everything that I know from him, took his classes, and I am a little bit fresher with what made me panic as a brand new beekeeper, or what I felt that I needed help with. And I think that by joining forces, we can pull in different levels of experience and different levels of knowledge, and try and come up with a product that will help new beekeepers, inform new beekeepers, and assist them on each time they go into the hive, help answer questions.
Yeah.
And we can take it from all different angles.
And it's been a long time since I was a beginner, back in the 70s, so my memory might be failing me, so sometimes I might not be hitting the point at which we really need to talk to beginners, because it's easy to forget the things that become second nature.
Okay, so some of the things that a lot of the newer beekeepers ask me, and I can really relate to some of their questions, are, starting right from ground zero. Where do I put my hives? Which way do I face them? Can I put them in a garage? Right from the very beginning. And
Yeah.
And you and I have different experiences, where I'm in the city, and you've got this lovely open out area out here. So.
Yeah, and actually, ironically, that's one of my most watched videos is location. What is the best location to put my hive?
Yeah.
And I suppose the key thing, and that varies enormously with where you are. So if somebody's watching this from Maine, follow sort of what we do here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing it in Tennessee, it'd be totally different in terms of temperature. So for example, I like to have my hives in the maximum amount of sun, as many hours of sun as possible, because as soon as the sun is on the bees, the more likely they are to be out in the field. And I know when I used to keep my hives in a relatively shady spot, there was maybe 2 hours later before they were out.
Yeah.
And so productivity and health of the hive is a lot better if they have more flying hours. And here in Maine, we don't have to worry about heat, particularly.
Right.
These are the same bees that can cope in Florida as they can cope in Maine. So overheating in Maine under hive in normal circumstances is never really an issue, as long as they've got water.
Absolutely.
So sun being number one, then probably protection from wind.
Yes.
And in terms of making sure that the bees aren't really exposed to a blasting wind in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And so something like a bee cozy helps with that. It really does break up the wind if they are in a windy environment.
Mm-hmm.
But a little wind break. So I've got a big expanse of the field behind me here, and so I might put up a couple of pallets to break up wind.
So it doesn't have to totally block the wind. It's just something
exactly.
To break
in fact, I remember you actually went a bit over the top.
I did.
When you were a beginner, because you put
I put straw bales all around the base,
Yeah.
to block that wind, and basically that worked great until it became waterlogged, and it weighed 5,000 pounds to try to move them away.
Yeah,
so
and
that was
then
a
of
learning.
course fungal issues become an issue.
Absolutely, moisture.
Yeah, and so I think as many hives die from moisture-related problems as they do from cold-related problems.
True.
And so if you are putting up a windbreak, don't put it too close to the hive. Make sure there's still room for the air to move around the hive, and plenty does move around the hive.
Right. And again, being in town, I just have a picket fence in front of mine, but it's like every other slat, so it's wide open, and that's something that I leave up year round. It allows the bees to go through it if they want to.
Yeah, that's what you do now, as opposed to before when you had the straw bales around. Or
Absolutely.
that sort of thing.
I never went back to the straw bales.
Yeah.
That was, and again, that's something that a lot of our new beekeepers ask. I mean,
Absolutely, absolutely, and intuitively it makes so much sense. Well, they look nice and cozy there, but what people fail to appreciate is the need for movement of air and things. And,
right.
and the hives are reasonably well designed, especially if they're insulated, that they get through fine without excessive blocking of wind. And that
Right.
sort of thing.
And another thing was, when people find out where I beekeep, a lot of people think I'm in the city or I'm in town or I have neighbors close by. I can't have bees, and that's just not true either. I mean, it's important to be a good neighbor anyway, and maybe educate and inform your neighbors. But I'm right in town. I have neighbors around. You can't see my hives. I do have a fence, but I don't have a whole expansive, large area like you have here. I'm right in town, and my bees do quite well right in town.
Yeah, and I mean in town, the real advantages of being in town is that the flora is so diverse. You've got hundreds of yards, of backyards, each with somebody's got different plants in and that sort of thing. And you actually find the honey flows are a lot more stable in that diverse environment than they are in an environment like this where a field dominates what it is.
Right.
But the other thing to remember, of course, is that you don't limit it by what we can see around the hives. It's what the bees find in the surrounding half-mile, 1 mile, 2 mile radius.
Absolutely.
That's the really important thing. So people often get preoccupied with planting what they've got lots of wildflowers sown in their backyard and that sort of thing, and it's fine, but it's always great to add more diversity of food in your quarter acre, your half acre, your 1 acre. But really it's the next 100 acres that are the most important to the bees.
Absolutely, and being in town, whereas areas with fields are really dependent upon the weather, as whether or not it rains, are we in a drought? Being in town, I find almost works out better for me because everybody's watering their gardens, and they're taking care of their plants. So the drought, it definitely affects them, but not nearly as much as it would affect bees that are feeding only on, your wild growth or
That's
something
right.
like that. So
That's right.
that part of being in town is nice.
Yeah. And of course in town you've got some reliable water supplies, bird baths and fountains and
Your
that
neighbor's
sort of
swimming
thing.
pool.
Your neighbor's swimming pool.
Yes.
And that's probably the next most important thing in terms of deciding on your location is bees need a water source. And if your nearest water source is your neighbor's swimming pool, then you have a potential problem in terms of conflict with your neighbors.
Yes.
So bird baths and like a splash paddling pool with rocks in it filled with water. And as long as it's always full of water, the bees will usually fixate on the closest source of water as long as it's permanent, rather than your neighbor's swimming pool. So I always say as long as that water source is closer than your nearest swimming pool, then you're good.
Right.
And so I've got a swimming pool 100 yards in that direction. So I've got a pond full of water 20 yards in that direction.
Yeah.
And a ditch actually around as well, which is often full of water. That's a bit variable. I found that just how important that was when we first moved to this location, because I dug that pond out and it was fine, virtually no bees in the pool until about the end of August when we had a drought and the pond dried up, and all of a sudden the pool was full of bees.
Yeah.
And so I made the pond a lot bigger, and ever since then it's not been an issue.
I have a bird bath right in my backyard as well, and I've found that my bees can drain that in a day. I mean, easily drain that in a day. And again, I don't have nearly as many hives as you have here. I have about 4, and I'm constantly having to fill that, and it's quite amazing to watch them all just hovering over that.
Yeah.
And then the birds trying to get in and get a sip every now.
Yeah, so in terms of location of the hive, really though, it's the best combination that you have. Bees are remarkably able to cope with a variety of different areas, but as long as you give them plenty of sun, good ventilation, a good water source, take into account your neighbors, proximity to your neighbors. You don't go pointing the entrance of the hive into the neighbor's yard. And you also want to, but you do want to take into account how your bees are going to influence how you're using your own yard. Because like these little hives here, we can have a little cloud of bees going in and out in front of the hive. But as you can see, although we're suited up, we could probably be not suited up,
Yep.
but we'd be perfectly
They're actually
okay.
quite calm.
Yeah, the bees will generally be fine, but at other occasions the bees may not be calm. Storm approaching, windy, lack of food coming in. We've got a honey flow on here at the moment, so these bees are very happy. But when the bees are a little less happy, you want to think of what you would be doing 10 yards in front of your hive, and so that's just the other thing to bear in mind.
So, and in mine, again, my hives actually are in my backyard, and I also have a deck, and my windbreak also acts as almost a directional, change of direction for my bees by placing my fence just in front of my hives. As my bees come out of the hive, they'll tend to come to that block and they go up. So we can be in our backyard, we can be on the deck, and we don't have any bees around us really.
Yeah.
They're up and out, and they head right up to treetop level.
Yeah. Whereas here, because I'm not using this space around, I can be standing over where the camera is, and if bees were coming in and out, they would be bumping into me.
Yeah.
Whereas you could be standing half that distance from the hive, because there's a fence there. The bees are already flying up.
Yep.
And it's uses a very small footprint in a relatively small space.
Absolutely.
And that's a great way to fit a hive into a small space.
Absolutely. I mean, I go out just in shorts and t-shirts, and those of us who are obsessed with bees like we are. I mean, I'll sit there and I'll just watch, and I'll be right next to my hives, with no protection on, and that little fence really causes them to go up and out. And every now and then, if I'm on their path, their runway to come back in, they'll bump into me. But it's just excuse me,
Yeah.
and then they go around. So
Yeah.
that's. But this, like I said, this year is great. They're super calm. I would even sit here without equipment. And
Today,
it's all about
today
your
is
comfort
certainly
level.
one of those days where bees aren't bothered at all.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you can tell
used
when
to be
they're-
scared of bees.
I was terrified of bees.
Yeah.
I really needed a hobby, and and I saw one of your commercials on TV, and I'm like, I wonder. And as I educated myself by taking classes and watching and learning, I'm absolutely. I pick them up if I find one struggling in the bird bath. I'll pick it up by hand. Whereas before I started doing this, if I heard a buzz in my car, I'd go off the road thinking there was something in my car. So it's totally changed my mindset on these amazing creatures here.
Yeah.